Hi everyone, in this video I will briefly go through the concept of the timeline and keyframes in Blender. With the current default Blender scene set up, I'm just going to go ahead and change from the default screen layout to the animation screen layout. So we have a few more screens to work with. When you work with animation, there are a few screens that you tend to work with. You can work with the dope sheet editor, you can work with the F-curve editor, and we also have the timeline. The timeline is basically that. It shows your animation from the beginning to the end. So we have the play button, which shows our animation starting from frame 1 all the way to frame 250. At default, in our current settings, we have a frame rate of 24 frames per second. So if I just change the end frame to 240, so that's 240 frames at 24 frames per second. So that means 240 divided by 24 is 10. So our animation would last 10 seconds. We can define the start and end frames of our animation to anything that we choose. So it doesn't have to be start. I can always start at frame 10 if I wanted, or I can end at frame 3600 if I wanted. It gives me that option. This here shows that the frame that you are currently on. So if I'm on frame 48, which is I think is the second of the animation, we can pretty much see how our animation will look like at that point. So when we define what our animation will look like at a specified set time, we call that keyframes. So we define how our objects, how our scene will look at a specific set time in our animation. So for example, say I want the scene to look like this on the first frame or the beginning of the animation. So I just go ahead and set a keyframe there by just pressing G and then enter. We'll look at that in the next video. Don't have to worry about how I set the keyframe there. And say on the second, so frame 48, I want the cube to look like that, rotated like that, scaled up like that, and like that. So at the second, I want the cube to look like that. And say by the 5th second, or is that the 5th? Or near the 5th second, I think. Or somewhere random like that. I want the cube to look like that and rotate it around. So as you can see, in the dope sheet editor, I can see the keyframes that I've created. So if I go back to the beginning of the animation and then play it back, we could see our cube moving and landing at the exact same pose at that exact set time where the keyframe was set. So that is pretty much the core of animation in Blender. So you work with the timeline, you specify certain poses you want at certain frames, and you set a keyframe at that time. So that is the concept of the timeline and keyframes.